Common sense stuff. By the way, business is common sense. Do not overcomplicate it. Keep it simple, stupid. That's what I always say. Kiss it. I also have an argument that I always tell my staff, and this is a conversation I have with every one of my guys and girls. I say, let's have a discussion, but we have to promise ourselves at the end of it, logic prevails. It doesn't always have to be my idea, but it has to be a logical idea. Because God is not a God of illogicalness. He's a God of logic. If you follow the basic principles of good, what's in the Bible, and you live by the standard rules, you will be blessed beyond measure. Now, I know there's got to be a lot of people with questions. Let's open it up to some questions. Who's got some questions? We got a floating mic here.
What would be the advantages or disadvantages of taking these principles overseas?
Well, are you going to go over there?
I'd like to, yes.
Take it. The same. I've lectured over in Cambridge, and it's the same exact principles. There's no difference. God is God everywhere. You know, it's funny, what you don't realize is when you think of trading, this is a concept that will change for everybody here. We trade what? Money, right? It's not even currency. It's a note. We know that, right? You guys know the difference. But in the past, we used to not trade currency. So in the part of the country I live, there's a sign I saw one day, open for trading. I said, open for trading? What does that mean? Googled it. It's like, wow, people used to come here and trade eggs, right? Milk. And they had a value system. What one pitcher of milk would cost would be so many eggs. And it did have a money value to it if you had the cash. But most people did not have money. They had something to trade. You're gonna have to get used to this concept of basically the cyber coin world. It's gonna hit you. I've been following it since 2000, I guess, 10. I've been involved in crypto early on. Blockchain technology, how many people know what blockchain technology is? Okay, it's a pretty big number. If I would have asked you this 10 years ago, nobody would have known. 5 years ago, maybe no one would have known, but it's become very popular. Yeah. So I was a miner. I got into the mining business. I ended up inheriting about 1,100 miners, which is computers that run. So I learned a lot about that. And at the time, Bitcoin was raging. If you bank somewhere, particularly Bank of America's already made you agree that any day they can convert your dollar to a cyber currency. Really? Yeah, that's part of the agreement now. Almost every national bank, you've had to agree to it. It's not a bad thing technically, but it's closer to hey, they're going to be labeling us and tracking us. Because now they'll know if you tithe or not, right? Because they'll be able to follow. But they're trying to figure out a way to control the crypto. Okay? It's the first time that wealth is beyond measure because there's so many people became billionaires over crypto. And it's not taxable until they cash it out. And you can move crypto all over the world. So I lived in Puerto Rico, in the wealthiest part of Puerto Rico, with a lot of crypto guys. The funny thing is I watched them, billionaires come in. I also watched them leave, get evicted, because they overspent. Again, wealth at one large dump is not easy to manage. So be blessed and think you're blessed, knowing that you weren't given wealth quickly. It just destroys you. I was given wealth quickly. I didn't know how to handle it. My parents really never set me up for it. I just thought this is the way it is. Oh, I'm going to keep making this kind of money. It doesn't. And God, that was a big learning lesson when I started to realize, okay, I don't think it was my doing. I really think the Holy Spirit just showed me that to show others how to do it as well. That was my financial strength of everybody around me. I was the guy in the movie industry that lent celebrities money. It was a very funny story because they all were wondering how does a guy like me have such a large operation not being from California? And it's because I budgeted. I didn't overextend. Everybody in California overextends. They live way beyond their means. They're living movie paycheck to movie paycheck in larger numbers than you can imagine. So they're constantly forced to do more movies. I helped manage Nicolas Cage one time because his agent came to me and said, I was in Hollywood all the time, so I said, sure, I'll look at his finances. And when I went to go look at one of his bleeding assets was his home he had 4 brand new Ferraris from the last 4 previous years that he never drove. Talk about odd. The day I go to look at these assets and verify they're available, a new Ferrari is being delivered. Because he had ordered them a year in advance, never have driven them, and he wondered why he was having financial troubles. The problem is that guy never signed a check. He had an accounting firm do it. And he didn't have a grasp because all he cared about was having his assistant book everything. He never had cash on him because he didn't have to. Always had an assistant pay for everything. His connection to reality was distorted. It is not the only one. Almost all of them are like that. It's very rare where you find someone that manages their own funding, their own cash, their own bills. It's very rare because they can't handle the pressures that you and I handle. See, everybody in this room is very well equipped. You're more equipped than the average Joe because apparently you're self-aware of your weaknesses and are willing to search out and listen and watch and study. At a young age, I was able to, I went and I asked the wealthiest people in my community if I could shadow them. And the one guy that I got lucky enough, blessed enough, was Wayne Huizenga. He owned several teams. And he showed me there's really no difference. And I watched him go from bringing massive industry to South Florida to being chased, and people tried to kill him. Because he did a lot in the stock market. He did a lot of controversial changes in the way Southern sanitation was ran. He's a garbage guy. But he taught me a lot of things. Then I went on to the next billionaire I met. Then I spent time with them. So to answer, the principles are the same anywhere you go. Particularly, I took the American way of doing business to China. They didn't understand it. Go ahead.
With the different exchange rates between U.S. dollars and places overseas, can you do more in the area there with U.S. dollars?
Well, that's an interesting question. Can the exchange rate be more lucrative in other countries? Well, I've often invested in the Canadian dollar and bought products in Canada because the Canadian dollar one time was very weak to ours. You just have to watch the currencies. But in like the euro right now is not that far off. There are other places that just aren't stable, like the lower Russian countries, their currencies are really down right now. But again, if you invest in those currencies, you're going to be stuck because it may lose its total value and become now, the Russian dollar. But yeah, the principles work the same. Just you're buying and trading something. When you look at things, I trade things. When I look at everything as a commodity. I don't look at it as the currency value. I do look at the raw cost. You'll hear me if you're asking me, I will say to you 2 things. How much does it cost to produce and what does it retail? Because I look at the spread.
Can I help you also?
Oh, yeah, please.
With this, because you're talking about ministry. When you look at it, so I used to think this way. I could reach in the Philippines with $50,000. I could reach 10,000 people. Okay, in the United States for the same, it's right at about $250,000. Right. And I used to think, I can get more bang for my buck in the Philippines, but the same faith it takes to believe God for 50,000 is the same thing it takes to believe for 250,000. The issue is not a matter of can I get more bang for the buck. The matter is what is God asking you to do? And so you go there because like the first time I went to the Philippines, I went with $13 in my pocket, right? And we did all these crusades. When I came home, I had $13 in my pocket because God paid for everything. So understanding those are the principles when you go overseas. The principles are the same. No matter what you do, you still have to budget. You still have to do everything. You have to know the right people because, so like when I go to the Philippines, I didn't go to the bank and do an exchange because they rip you off. I would ask, who's the thug? Who runs the streets here, right? And I would find like mafia type people that would do money exchange for me because they would give me the best rates, right? So like 40 pesos to $1, right? I go to the bank and on the exchange it says 40 pesos to $1. I go to the bank, they give me 30. But if I went to like the mobster guy, he'd give me 44. You know what? Because you know what it's money laundering. They just got through selling drugs and they need to get rid of money. And that's what it is. But the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the righteous. So what I'm doing is I'm taking advantage of a situation and getting as much as I can so that I can impact the nation. I've told you, I'm not church. Yeah, I'm not church. Are you hearing what I'm saying? So I'm looking for, I ask people, I go, so who is it that is in this neighborhood that I shouldn't go see as a white guy? And they're like, well, do you really want to go? And I'm like, yeah, because I'm called of God. They're not going to harm me. Well, aren't you afraid of getting robbed? No, if they touch me, they're probably going to die. So, because it's God's money. So I would go into the roughest places. Like literally, it's like you walking down an alley and everybody's staring at you and they're like got knives in their hands. But I always get a good exchange rate. I did the same thing in Indonesia. Remember in Indonesia, the one couple that we did the exchange with, they had a much better exchange rate there. Sorry.
It's true.
Ministry. So when you're talking about ministry, it has to do with faith. And the same thing is with business. You can do business in the Philippines, but it's the same thing. It's all the principles are the same. Methods are different. Methods change, but principles don't.
Americans do well all over the world, by the way, because we have a hard work ethic. Everybody wants to work for you, it's true. Bahamas, Caribbean, it's littered with Americans. Costa Rica, that whole part of the country, that part of the world is loaded with expats. And they do real well. Because there's a big difference between their work ethic and our work ethic. And we're good at organizing. And they just love working with Americans. One of my favorite countries is Costa Rica, by the way. I almost moved there. Or Panama, but either one of them. I was going to buy an island. When Obama became president, I decided this is going to get bad. So a few of my friends bought islands. So I said, well, how much is an island? By the way, how much does an island cost? Does anybody know?
100,000.
Say again?
100,000.
You're 100% right. It's about $100,000. I didn't think it was that expensive. So I went over there and I looked around. They had a little bit of a problem is that there's not a lot of open area on a little island. And an island's maybe 20, 30 acres. If that's a big island. But solar-wise, you had to really get rid of a lot of trees to do it. It wasn't feasible. So you had to run off of diesel, And what was great is that there was great opportunity there, but there was all Americans littered. And, they're great. They all type of wealthy people. I met some wealthy people out there that just couldn't take it anymore. And they liked the solitude they're just left alone, enjoy their quality of life. Who else has got a question?
So you mentioned you were an inventor. It's a twofold question.
Sure.
So what advice would you give to those who you have already envisioned an idea, an invention, you've already made sketches and whatnot, but you don't know the next step to making it come to fruition? In other words, you have an idea and you've just designed it. What would you do next? And then the second part to the question that I have is, have you ever had an invention idea and you're like, I'm gonna create this, and then years later, somebody, like, you see a commercial for it, and you're like, I had that idea. Like, what does that mean? Or like, what
Well,
did that happen to you?
simultaneous invention happens every day. A good idea is generated from people that a need, the mother of invention is necessity, right? So in the United States, we are now part of the rest of the world. It's he who files first wins. So if you file a patent, you get the filing date. I lived in the patent world all my life. The first set of patents that I had, I dealt with patent lawyers, and I realized that they were charging me as much as they could, and then I decided that I was going to figure out how to do it myself, and I started to write my own patents. And then I got into hiring what's called a patent agent. So I went through the whole series of patents, but I developed my own prototypes. I presented myself. My book basically is about licensing, which everybody, if you email me, I'll send you a copy. It's about licensing. It's everything you're asking me. How I took an idea and I brought it forward. So I'll give you guys a quick story on, at the time, I was a magician, so I was very good at building little mechanical devices. What ends up happening is I developed a mechanism that I was going to make these little characters talk to each other. I found a chip, totally by accident, that the chip was able to broadcast an RF signal, and the chip also received an RF signal. So this little character that I developed out of little styrofoam pieces, it would look at it, his eyes would move, his head would bobble, it would lift his shoulders up. And I made 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl, and they had little voices, and they'd talk to each other, and they'd communicate. Anyways, at the time, the toy industry never had anything interactive. So because I knew that I was onto something, I knew that I had to get to New York City. In New York at the time, they still do, but it's not as big. They do have the World Toy Convention. It's once a year. And there's a building that's full of toy manufacturers. And it's where everybody comes from all over the world to trade for toys and put them into mass retail. I wanted to go see Hasbro so badly. And I knew that, I knew I had something that they'd want to see, but I wanted to meet the president of Hasbro. And I knew that he was on the 24th floor, and I had to get there. And there's 3 elevators I had to get through. And I didn't have an appointment, but I was there for the toy fair. So I just prayed, and I have my little bag. It's a doctor's, it looked like a doctor's visit, like doctor's bag, you know. And I had them in there ready to go with a couple of things. And I go into the building, walk past the security guy as someone walks into the elevator. And he uses his key fob, and up we go to the 6th floor. Door opens. I walk across the hall to the 2nd set of elevators, and the door opens, and I go in. And I go all the way up to the last elevator. I get out, and there's nobody on the floor. I'm going, uh-oh, this is where it's going to fall apart. Door opens, person walks out. I go, well, let's see. I hit the 24th floor. We go up. And I'm like, okay. The anxiety is pouring out of me. I go up to the receptionist, and I go, ma'am, now I found out that she's the president of Hasbro's personal secretary. Wow. And I said, ma'am, I've come all this way. I'm a magician. I just told her the story. I said, so I take out the 3 little guys. I put them in my hand like this, and I popping their heads, it turns them on. Now these are first generation prototypes. They were hardwired. I couldn't change batteries out in them. I just could turn them on and off. So if I forgot to turn them off, the batteries would go dead. And I have no place to go solder, or it was no time. So anyways, I get these things going, and she looks at me, and she goes, wow, those are really, really cute. And I go, yeah, well, can I just show it to him? I know he's in town. She looks at me, and she was a Southern lady. She grew up in the southern part of Alabama, which is kind of funny. So she says, she looks around, she starts thinking, just wait here a minute. She comes back, and goes, look, I can't tell you when. I may get you 5 minutes with him, but I can't tell you when. You just have to wait here. Do not move. 4.5 hours I sat. I had to pee so bad. I didn't think it's appropriate for me to ask, can I go pee? And anyways, about 4.5 hours. I mean, I thought it was already like 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I go, hey, you haven't forgot about me? She goes, no, I haven't forgot about you. All of a sudden, the door opens and the chairman comes out. It's the chairman of the board now. It's not the president of the company. And they happen to be meeting with all of its engineers. And they thought it'd be a great comical relief to go talk to an inventor who just somehow got to the top. So they put me in this giant conference room at the end of the room, which is probably 24, 25 chairs on each side. It's a giant conference room table. I've never seen anything that big. And they put me on one end, and in come in these engineers. They march in, and the chairman of the company comes out, and he goes, all right, kid, show us what you got. Now, you gotta remember, I was a performer. Pressure didn't bother me, so I just kicked into my performing gear. So I take out the three, separate them out so they can see there's no wires, and I hit them and I start talking to them, and they start interacting. And I watch these engineers, their eyes like, how's he doing it? Why? And I knew it was rolling through their head. Why is any one of us? There's like 40 engineers in the room. Not one of them's ever developed it. Chairman goes, why haven't you guys come up with this? Why is it a guy from South Florida? Yeah, and I learned a lesson from that I made a lot of enemies that day, because my rest of my career with Hasbro was always uphill battle, because I wasn't a certified engineer. I was just a guy that tinkered and became really good at it and made more money than they could ever make. So this is an interesting part of it. I end up, I do my thing, and he says, the chairman, what else you got? Well, I go, well, just so happens. I pull out of my bag, and I said, well, I've invented this interesting magic routine for kids, and it's a glove. And what it did was the glove, my mom was a seamstress. So I learned something, that I was able to statically charge this fabric, that it would cling styrofoam to it. So I had these little red styrofoam balls, and I could do this cool magic trick that anybody can learn in 5 minutes. All you had to learn is a little bit of presentation. Well, while I was sitting there showing them this, and they were kind of looking at the different things I was showing them, passing it around, I was picking up just stagnant dust that the light was coming in from the sun was setting. When sunset's kind of funny, you can see dust. Well, my glove was able to, you just do that, and it attract dust to it, because it was very charged. So anyways, the meeting goes well. They end up licensing the technology from me. I never made but my first 3. I ended up developing what came out to be the Furby. You guys remember the Furby? Yeah. About 10 years later, I got the challenge. They developed a character called Tickle Me Elmo. But it was so boring. It didn't do what. So they came to me and said, how can we make it work off of one little motor to do all it did? And I figured it out, made the motor for them, and I got royalties for that for 20 years. Tickle Me Elmo was great. And also I developed all the internal guts to a lot of toys. And one thing that's funny is I didn't ever want to get the credit to be the Tickle Me Elmo guy, whatever. I wanted the credit that I got a royalty. I was just happy collecting revenue. I learned that it's being popular doesn't matter to me. What matters is the paycheck, because that's what funds me to do all the other things. But while I was sitting there at the table, this one engineer was very curious about my gloves, and he was a Japanese man. Hasbro had a sister company that was international, and he says, I want to write you. So I give him my address, and back then it was address, it was crazy. And he writes me this letter saying, could you please provide me with technical drawings of how you did that? How do you static? So I did. A couple of weeks go by, I get a letter from them and said, we'd like to license your glove technology. We just want the rights to how you statically charge fabric. Okay, so I request a $50,000 upfront fee for my description, because there was a lot of stuff I had to go into. Really, I wanted just to get them to pay me up front, because Anyways, I signed a license agreement, which is a copy of my license agreements are in here, and a non-disclosure, which you need to know about. And sent it off. I get a check in the mail. Don't hear from them for about a year. Then I turn on the TV one day, and the first commercial for a product that was not in a glove form, but in sheets, it was Swiffer. So I'm the father of Swiffer. Yeah. I love Swiffer. If you use it, thank you very much. Yeah. So it wasn't designed as a cleaning product, but it was the concept crossovered. You know, I didn't even have a patent issued at the time because it was toy oriented. I don't like to file patents on toys because they change so quickly. But I had a trade secret how I made it, and it was totally simple. It was not complex, but to the engineers, I had to make it very complicated because they would not buy it if it was too simple. But anyway, since then I developed I have lots of products in your home that I've developed that, you know, you use a lot of processes. I normally find a new technology and bring it to another industry. But talking about inventing, I could spend 3 days about it because there's processes to it. The wealthiest people in the world hold licenses, music licenses, patent licenses, trademark licenses. It is something healthy that you guys should know. Maybe I'll come back just to do a thing on licensing and patents, and because that's one thing I've learned. Same thing goes, why do you put your intellectual properties into an LLC? You want to separate it from you because I've been sued before. I've been sued against my own invention. There are people that are that, but that's another world, and luckily God's always protected me. But they attack. There are people out there called patent trolls. But I've been an avid inventor all my life, and I've invented quite a few great products that have changed the way, you know, we do things in America, and it goes all over the world.